The snow had turned crimson where Helena Morrison's body fell, though not from blood but from the red dawn breaking over the Arizona mountains, painting everything in shades of fire and ice that seemed impossible in a territory more known for scorching heat than winter storms. Zachariah Mercer had been tracking the mountain lion for 3 days when he spotted what he thought was a deer carcass in the clearing ahead. His breath formed white clouds in the frigid January air as he urged his mare forward, rifle ready across his saddle. The winter of 1882 had brought unusual storms to the high country north of Holbrook, and the big cats were getting desperate, coming down closer to the settlements. But as he drew nearer, his chest tightened with recognition. That was no deer. That was a woman, collapsed face down in the snow, her dark hair splayed around her like a funeral shroud. He was off his horse before he had time to think, his boots crunching through the frozen crust as he ran to her side. When he touched her neck with bare fingers, searching for a pulse, her skin was cold as the snow itself, but there beneath his fingertips he felt it, faint and slow but unmistakable. Life, stubborn and clinging. "Madam," he said urgently, turning her over as gently as he could manage with shaking hands. Her lips were blue, her face pale as milk, but her eyelids fluttered at his touch. "Madam, can you hear me?" No response came, only a soft exhalation that might have been a moan. He looked around the clearing, calculating distances in his mind. His camp was perhaps 2 miles back the way he had come, but there was a hunting shelter he had used last season much closer, maybe half a mile east. He had to get her warm. Now. Zachariah scooped her into his arms, surprised by how light she felt, and carried her to where his mare stood waiting, ears pricked forward with concern. Getting mounted with an unconscious woman in his arms took some maneuvering, but he managed it, settling her across his lap with her head against his chest. She wore only a thin dress under a coat that had seen better days, no gloves, no proper boots for winter travel. What in God's name had driven her out into this wilderness so ill-prepared? The ride to the shelter felt eternal, though it could not have been more than 15 minutes. He kept talking to her the whole way, nonsense mostly, just words to fill the silence and maybe, he hoped, to call her back from whatever dark place she was drifting toward. "Stay with me now," he murmured against her hair. "Just a little farther. Going to get you warm, get you safe. You just hold on." The shelter was barely more than 3 walls and a roof, built against a rock face with a fire pit in the center, but it was protection from the wind, and that was everything. Zachariah kicked the door open and carried her inside, laying her down on the packed earth floor as gently as he could before sprinting back out to fetch his saddlebags and bedroll from the mare. His hands were steadier now, moving through familiar motions. Build a fire, create warmth, save a life. He had kindling and logs stored in the shelter from his last visit, kept dry under an oiled canvas. Within minutes, he had flames crackling in the pit, and he dragged his bedroll close to the growing heat. Then came the difficult part. Her wet clothes had to come off or she would never warm properly. He worked as quickly and respectfully as he could, averting his eyes when possible, wrapping her in his spare blankets and his own heavy coat. Once he had her down to her undergarments. He laid her on the bedroll and tucked the blankets around her, then added more wood to the fire until the flames leapt high, and the small space began to fill with blessed warmth. Only then did he allow himself to really look at her face. She was young, perhaps 23 or 24, with strong features that spoke of determination rather than delicate beauty. Even pale and half frozen, there was something striking about her, something that caught in his chest. A scar ran from her left eyebrow into her hairline, old and faded. Her hands, when he took them in his to rub warmth back into them, were calloused and work-worn. This was no pampered town woman who had taken a wrong turn on a Sunday ride. "Who are you?" he asked the silent form, working his thumbs in circles over her palms. "What were you running from?" As if in answer, her eyes opened. They were green, he noted with surprise, a deep forest green that seemed to look right through him. For a moment they stared at each other, the silence broken only by the snap and pop of the fire. Then her lips moved, forming words he had to lean close to hear. "He will find me," she whispered. "He always finds me." Before he could ask who, before he could say anything at all, her eyes rolled back and she went limp again. But it was different now. She had moved from that dangerous place between life and death into something more like natural sleep. Her breathing was deeper, steadier. The blue had faded from her lips. Zachariah sat back on his heels and released a breath he had not known he was holding. She would live. Whatever had driven her out into the winter night, whatever demons were chasing her, she would live to face another day. He found himself grateful for that in a way that went beyond the normal satisfaction of helping someone in need. Something about this woman called to him, some recognition that made no logical sense, but sat in his gut like certainty. He spent the next hour keeping watch over her and tending the fire, occasionally checking her pulse and the warmth returning to her extremities. Her color improved gradually, the deadly pallor giving way to something more natural. While she slept, he examined her clothes, looking for clues to her identity. The dress was plain calico, mended in several places with careful stitches. The coat was a man's garment, several sizes too large. In one pocket, he found a small cloth bundle containing a few coins. Not enough for stage fare, but perhaps enough for a few meals. In the other pocket, he found something that made his jaw tighten. A photograph, creased and worn from much handling, showing a hard-faced man with cold eyes standing beside a seated woman who looked younger than the man by at least 20 years. The woman in the photograph shared the same determined features as his unconscious guest. He tucked the photograph back where he had found it and sat down to wait, his rifle across his knees. If someone was following her, someone she feared, he wanted to be ready. She woke again as the sun was climbing toward noon, the light through the shelter's gaps painting stripes across the packed earth floor. This time her eyes focused immediately on him, sharp and wary despite her obvious weakness. "Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse but stronger than before. "Hunting shelter about 15 miles north of Hallbrook," Zachariah said, keeping his tone calm and even. "I found you in the snow this morning, near froze to death. How are you feeling?" She tried to sit up, then seemed to realize her state of undress and pulled the blankets more tightly around herself. "My clothes. Had to get the wet things off you. They are by the fire, drying. I did not look more than necessary, you have my word on that." He gestured to where her dress and undergarments hung from a makeshift line he had strung near the flames. "Name is Zachariah Mercer. Friends call me Zach." She studied him for a long moment, those green eyes measuring and calculating. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her somewhat, because her shoulders relaxed a fraction. "Helena Morrison. People call me Lena." "Well, Miss Morrison, mind telling me what you were doing wandering through the high country in the middle of winter, dressed like you were going to a church social?" A bitter smile crossed her face. "Running. Same thing I have been doing for 3 years now." From the man in the photograph, her eyes widened. "You went through my pockets, looking for identification in case you did not make it." Zachariah kept his voice matter of fact. "The photograph." "That man. He is the one you said would find you." Helena's hands tightened on the blanket edge. For a moment he thought she would refuse to answer, but then the words came spilling out as if a dam had broken. "My husband, Thomas Morrison. We married when I was 18 back in Missouri." I was young and stupid and thought I could handle his temper. Thought I could be good enough, quiet enough, obedient enough that he would not hurt me. But it was never about what I did. It was about what he was. Zachariah's grip on his rifle tightened. He beat you. Beat me, burned me, locked me in the cellar for days at a time. She said it flatly, as if reading a list of chores. 3 years ago, I finally ran. Got as far as Kansas before he caught me. That time I got away after 2 weeks. Then I ran again and he caught me again in Colorado. Each time I get farther. Each time I learn more about how to disappear. This time I made it all the way to Arizona territory before he found me in Flagstaff, working in a boarding house. You were in Flagstaff. That is 60 miles from where I found you. I ran 2 days ago when I saw him talking to the sheriff. I knew he would have told some lie about me, made himself out to be the worried husband looking for his wayward wife. So I left with nothing but what I was wearing and started walking. I was trying to reach Holbrook, thought maybe I could get lost in a bigger town, but the storm came up last night and I got turned around in the dark. After a while, I could not feel my feet anymore. Could not feel much of anything. I remember thinking it might not be so bad to just lie down in the snow and sleep. Well, I am glad you did not, Zachariah said, surprised by the force of feeling behind his words. And I am glad I found you when I did. She looked at him then, really looked, and he felt the weight of her gaze like a physical thing. Why? You do not know me. I am a stranger who has brought nothing but trouble. Maybe, but you are also a person who deserves better than what life has handed you. And it just so happens I am in a position to help. He stood and moved to his saddlebags, pulling out hardtack and jerky. You need to eat something, get your strength back, then we can figure out what comes next. There is no next, Helena said, but she took the food when he offered it. There is only running until he catches me again, or until I get lucky and he does not. Those are the only 2 futures I have. What if there was a third option? She laughed, a harsh sound. Like what? You going to shoot him for me? That would just put you in jail and me back in his hands, assuming I did not hang as an accessory. The law does not care much about why a man gets killed, only that he did. I was not suggesting murder, Zachariah said, though the idea had crossed his mind. But there are places a person can go where they are hard to find, and there are ways to make a trail impossible to follow. I have tried everything. New names, new towns, different work. He always finds me. He has money, and money buys information. Someone always remembers a woman traveling alone, always remembers which direction she went. She bit into the hardtack, chewing mechanically. You should take me to Holbrook and leave me there. Forget you ever saw me. Whatever trouble is coming, you do not want to be part of it. Maybe I should decide that for myself. They ate in silence after that, the fire crackling between them. Zachariah found himself watching her when he thought she was not looking, noting the way she held herself even wrapped in blankets, straight-backed and defiant despite everything. She had survived years of hell and kept running, kept fighting. That took a kind of strength he respected deeply. His own life had been hard in its way, growing up on a failing ranch in Texas, losing his father to drink and his mother to grief, but he had always been free. He could not imagine what it would be like to be hunted by someone who claimed to own you. As the afternoon wore on and Helena's clothes dried by the fire, Zachariah made a decision. I have a place, he said abruptly. A cabin up in the White Mountains, near the New Mexico border. Built it myself 3 years back when I was working as a guide. It is remote. No roads lead to it, and you would not find it unless you knew exactly where to look. I go there sometimes when I want to get away from people. Helena looked up from the blanket she had been studying. Why are you telling me this? Because you could go there. Stay the winter. By spring, Maybe this Thomas Morrison will have given up looking in Arizona, moved on to searching somewhere else. It would give you time to rest, to plan your next move properly instead of just running blind. And what would you want in return? Her voice was hard, suspicious. The question stung, though he supposed he could not blame her for asking. Nothing. A warm place to sleep and food to eat is not something that should come with strings attached. Everything comes with strings attached. I learned that the hard way. Then I suppose you will have to decide if you trust me or not. Zachariah stood and walked to the shelter entrance, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. Your clothes should be dry enough soon. I can take you to Holbrook like you asked, drop you at the edge of town and ride away. You will never see me again. Or I can take you to the cabin, make sure you are set up with enough supplies to last until spring, and then you will never see me again. Either way, Miss Morrison, I am not asking anything from you except the chance to help. He heard her moving behind him, the rustle of blankets being set aside. When he glanced back, she had turned her back to him and was reaching for her clothes. The cabin, she said quietly. I will take my chances with the cabin. They set out 2 hours later, after Helena had dressed and eaten more of his provisions. Zachariah gave her his heavy coat since hers was barely adequate, and he fashioned coverings for her feet from spare canvas and leather straps, not pretty but functional enough to keep her from losing toes to frostbite. She moved stiffly, her body still recovering from its ordeal, but she did not complain as she climbed up behind him on the mare. The ride to the cabin took the rest of the day. They traveled higher into the mountains, following game trails and creek beds that would show no trace of their passage once the next snow fell. Helena held onto him without speaking, her arms around his waist, her cheek pressed against his back. He found himself acutely aware of her presence, the weight and warmth of her behind him, the way she trusted him enough to let exhaustion claim her even as they rode. Twice he felt her start to slip sideways and caught her arm to steady her. Darkness was falling when they finally reached the cabin. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, built low against the wind with a stone chimney and shuttered windows. To anyone passing by, if anyone ever passed by this far from civilization, it would look like nothing more than an abandoned trapper's shack. But inside it was solid and weatherproof, with a good stove, a bed frame, a table and chairs, and shelves he had built into the walls. Zachariah helped Helena down from the horse in half, carried her inside while she swayed on her feet. He sat her in one of the chairs and quickly got a fire going in the stove, then lit the oil lamps he kept stored there. Golden light filled the small space, pushing back the shadows. It is not much, he said, suddenly seeing the cabin through her eyes and finding it wanting. But it is dry and it is safe. It is perfect, Helena said, and the wonder in her voice made him look at her in surprise. She was gazing around the single room as if it were a palace. I have not had a place that was just mine since I left Missouri. Every room I have rented, every boarding house I have stayed in, I was always waiting for the door to burst open, always listening for his footsteps. This is perfect. Something in Zachariah's chest loosened at her words. Good, that is good. He moved to the shelves and started pulling down supplies, doing a mental inventory. I have beans, cornmeal, coffee, some canned goods. There is a smokehouse out back with venison and elk from last season. Should be plenty to last until I can get back here with more. Get back. Helena's head snapped up. You are leaving. Have to. I was supposed to be in Holbrook 3 days ago to collect payment for that mountain lion I was tracking, and I will need to buy supplies to stock this place properly for a long stay. He saw the fear flash across her face and added quickly, but I will not leave until morning and I will be back in 2 days, 3 at most. I give you my word. She nodded slowly, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. Of course she was afraid. He was the only thing standing between her and complete isolation in an unfamiliar wilderness. "I will be fine," she said, as if trying to convince herself. "I am not some delicate flower who cannot manage a few days alone. Never thought you were." Zachariah pulled the bed frame away from the wall, examining it critically. "This will need a new mattress. The old one got moldy. For tonight we can pile up some of the furs and blankets I have stored here. You take the bed area. I will sleep by the stove." They worked together to set up sleeping arrangements and prepare a simple meal of beans and cornbread. The domestic normalcy of it felt strange and right at the same time. Zachariah found himself hyper-aware of Helena's presence in the small space, the way she moved, the sound of her voice when she asked where he kept the plates. It had been a long time since he had shared living space with anyone, and never with a woman who made him feel like the air had gone thin. Over dinner they talked, carefully at first and then with growing ease. She asked about his life, and he told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to track and hunt from his father before the whiskey took him, about drifting through the territories doing whatever work he could find. "Ended up in Arizona about 5 years ago," he said. "Liked it well enough to stay. Did some cattle work, some scouting for the army, some hunting. Built this place when I needed somewhere to go when the world got too loud." "Do you have family? Anyone who worries about you?" "No. Parents are both gone, and I was an only child. There is freedom in that, I suppose, but it gets lonely sometimes." Helena nodded, understanding. "I had 2 sisters back in Missouri. I have not seen them since I married Thomas. He said they were a bad influence, that they would turn me against him with their modern ideas about women's rights and independence. I wonder if they even know I am alive." "What about before him? What was your life like?" A smile crossed her face, transforming it. "Happy. My father was a school teacher. My mother took in sewing. We did not have much money, but we had books and music and laughter. My sisters and I were going to do great things. Emily wanted to be a doctor. Charlotte was going to be a lawyer. And I was going to write novels, great sweeping stories about adventure and romance." The smile faded. "Then Thomas came to town. He was older, established, handsome in his way. He courted me properly, won over my parents. Everyone thought I was so lucky, and I thought I was in love." "You were young. We all make mistakes when we are young. Some mistakes almost kill you." She set down her fork, her appetite apparently gone. "I do not even remember the girl I was before him. She seems like someone from a story I once read." "Maybe being here will help you remember," Zachariah said softly. "No one to perform for, no one to hide from, just you and the mountain." She met his eyes across the table, and something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. "Thank you," she said. "I do not think I said that yet. Thank you for saving my life, for bringing me here, for not asking for anything in return. You would have done the same for me." "Yes," she agreed. "I would have." They cleaned up the dishes together, and then exhaustion overtook Helena so completely that she swayed on her feet. Zachariah guided her to the makeshift bed and turned his back while she settled in, then banked the stove and made his own bed near it. The cabin fell silent except for the pop and tick of cooling metal and the soft sound of Helena's breathing. He lay awake for a long time, staring at the dark ceiling and thinking about green eyes and stubborn courage. He had known this woman for less than a day, but already she had gotten under his skin in a way no one else ever had. It was not just her beauty, though she was beautiful in that fierce, unpolished way he preferred to the painted delicacy of saloon girls. It was her strength, the core of unbreakable will that had kept her alive through years of horror. It was the way she looked at him, wary but wanting to trust, afraid but refusing to give in to fear. He was in trouble, he realized. Deep trouble of the kind that changed a man's life. And the worst part was, he could not even regret it. Morning came cold and clear. Zachariah woke to find Helena already up, feeding wood into the stove and setting coffee to boil. She had found the comb he kept in his shaving kit and tamed her dark hair into a braid that hung down her back. In the morning light, with color fully returned to her face, she was even more striking than he had thought. "You did not have to get up," he said, sitting up and rubbing sleep from his eyes. "You need rest. I have rested, and you have a long ride ahead of you." She poured coffee into 2 tin cups and brought him one. "I wanted to make sure you had a hot breakfast before you left." They ate together, and then it was time for Zachariah to go. He showed her where everything was stored, how to bank the stove for overnight, where he kept the rifle and ammunition. "If anyone comes, and I do not think they will, you hide first and shoot second. There is a root cellar behind the cabin with an entrance hidden under that pile of firewood. You can squeeze through there if you need to." Helena nodded, committing it all to memory. 2 days, you said, 3 at most. I will bring back everything you might need." He hesitated, then pulled out his father's old pocket watch and pressed it into her hand. "Take this. It keeps good time. Will make the waiting easier if you can mark the hours." She looked down at the worn silver case, then back up at him. "This was your father's. I cannot take this." "You are not taking it. I am lending it to you. You can give it back when I return." He closed her fingers around it. 2 days, Helena. I will be back in 2 days. "I will be here," she said, and he heard the unspoken plea beneath the words. "Do not forget me. Do not leave me here alone forever." He wanted to pull her into his arms, to promise her things he had no right to promise, but instead he just nodded and stepped out into the cold morning. The ride down the mountain was hard in ways that had nothing to do with the terrain. He kept thinking about Helena alone in the cabin, kept wondering if he was making a terrible mistake by leaving her. But he had no choice. She needed supplies, and he needed to make sure no one in Holbrook had heard about a missing woman or a searching husband. The town was bustling when he arrived that afternoon, full of freight wagons and cowboys, and the usual assortment of drifters and merchants. Zachariah collected his payment for the mountain lion and then started shopping, buying enough supplies for a long winter in careful increments from different stores so no one would wonder why he needed so much. Flour, sugar, coffee, canned goods, salt, dried beans, rice, molasses. Fabric for dresses and a good winter coat in a size that might fit Helena. Boots that looked about right. Books, because he remembered her saying she wanted to be a writer. Paper and pencils. A proper mattress and bedding. In the saloon that night, he nursed a beer and listened to the talk around him. There was gossip about a shooting in Winslow, complaints about the railroad prices, speculation about whether the Apache troubles were really over, but nothing about a missing woman or a searching husband. He allowed himself to relax slightly. Maybe Thomas Morrison had not tracked Helena this far. Maybe she had finally managed to slip away clean. He was heading back to his hotel when he passed the sheriff's office and saw the poster in the window. His blood went cold. It was a drawing of Helena, a decent likeness though it made her look harder and older than she was. Below the image, text read, "Missing, Helena Morrison, age 24, last seen in Flagstaff. Believed to be traveling alone and possibly confused or injured. Reward for information leading to her safe return. Contact Thomas Morrison, Holbrook Hotel." Zachariah stood frozen, reading the words again and again. Thomas Morrison was not just in Arizona. He was here, in Holbrook. Probably had been here for days, searching, asking questions, showing that picture to everyone who would look. He forced himself to walk calmly to his hotel, to climb the stairs at a normal pace, to lock his door before he let the panic set in. Morrison was here. Had probably talked to half the town. Would definitely have spoken to every merchant, every stable hand, everyone who might have seen a woman traveling alone. But Zachariah had been careful. He had not mentioned Helena to anyone, had spread his purchases across multiple stores, had not done anything to draw attention. There was no reason for Morrison to connect him to his missing wife, unless someone had seen them together. Unless someone had noticed him riding out with a woman behind him on his horse. He barely slept that night, his mind racing through possibilities and worst-case scenarios. At first light he was up and finishing his supply runs, moving quickly now, anxious to get back to Helena and warn her. He was loading the last of his purchases onto a pack mule he had rented when a voice stopped him cold. That is a lot of supplies for one man. Zachariah turned slowly. The man standing behind him was the one from the photograph, older and harder in person but unmistakable. Thomas Morrison stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt, a genial smile on his face that did not reach his cold eyes. "Stocking up for winter," Zachariah said casually. "Planning to do some trapping up in the high country. The high country. Lot of mountain up there. Easy to get lost if you do not know the trails." Morrison stepped closer, and Zachariah smelled expensive cologne mixed with the underlying odor of stale sweat. "I am looking for someone, actually. My wife. She has been unwell, not in her right mind. Left Flagstaff a few days ago without telling anyone. I am worried sick about her. Sorry to hear that. I have not seen any women traveling alone." "No." Morrison's eyes were calculating. "Funny thing, though. The hostler at the livery said you came in yesterday leading your horse, and he could have sworn he saw 2 sets of fresh tracks in the snow on your saddle blanket. Like maybe someone had been riding with you." Zachariah kept his face carefully neutral. "Horse threw me day before yesterday. Had to get back on more than once. Makes extra tracks, I suppose it does." Morrison smiled again, and Zachariah's hand drifted toward his gun. "Well, if you do see a woman matching my Helena's description, you will let me know, will you not? There is a reward for information, a generous one." "I will keep an eye out." "You do that." Morrison tipped his hat and walked away, but Zachariah could feel the man's suspicion like a weight on his back. He finished loading the mule with hands that wanted to shake, mounted his mare, and rode out of town at a pace calculated to look unhurried. Only when he was well out of sight did he let the horse break into a gallop. He had to get back to Helena. Had to warn her that Morrison was close and suspicious. Had to figure out what they were going to do, because the cabin was no longer the safe haven he had promised. Morrison was not going to give up. Men like that never did. They saw other people as property, possessions to be controlled and kept, and they would burn down the world before they let their possessions escape. The ride back to the cabin took half the time it should have, because Zachariah pushed both animals harder than he should have. The sun was setting when he finally broke through the tree line into the clearing, and relief flooded through him when he saw smoke rising from the chimney. She was still there, still safe. Helena came to the door as he was unloading supplies, her face lighting up at the sight of him before wariness crept in. "You are back early. Something is wrong." "He is in Hallbrook," Zachariah said without preamble. "Thomas Morrison. He has been there for days, showing your picture around, offering a reward. I ran into him this morning." All the color drained from her face. "Did he follow you?" "No, I was careful and I watched my back trail the whole way, but he is suspicious. He knows something is not right." Zachariah carried the last of the supplies inside and shut the door firmly. "We need to talk about what happens next." Helena sank into a chair, her hands gripping the table edge so hard her knuckles went white. I need to leave, tonight. Head east toward New Mexico, or maybe south toward Mexico itself. Get as far away as possible before he figures out where I am. That is not going to work. You are barely recovered from your last attempt at running. Another winter journey on foot will kill you, and you cannot buy a horse or stage passage without someone remembering and reporting it to Morrison. Then what do you suggest? Her voice was sharp with fear and frustration. I cannot stay here. You cannot keep me. Eventually he will figure it out, and then you will be in danger too. Maybe that is a risk I am willing to take. She stood abruptly, crossing to the stove and staring into its glowing heart. Why? Why would you risk anything for me? You do not know me. You do not owe me anything. Zachariah moved to stand behind her, close enough to feel the heat radiating from her body but not touching. Do you want the honest answer? I want to understand what is happening here. The honest answer is that from the moment I saw you in the snow, something changed. I looked at you and I felt like I was seeing something I had been searching for my whole life without knowing it. And I know that sounds crazy. I know we just met and you have no reason to believe me or trust me. But it is the truth, Helena. You matter to me. Your life matters. Your freedom matters. And I am not going to let that man take you back. She turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. Do not say things like that. Do not make me hope for something that cannot be. Why can it not be? Because I am married. Because the law says I belong to Thomas Morrison until death do us part. Because there is no divorce for women like me, no escape that does not end with me dead or locked away in an asylum where he can have me declared insane. I have looked into every option, Zachariah, every possible way out. They all end the same way, not every way. The idea had been forming in his mind since he saw that poster, growing clearer with every mile he rode. Now it crystallized into certainty. Marry me. Helena stared at him as if he had lost his mind. What? Marry me. In secret, with just the two of us and whatever passes for God in these mountains as witnesses. It would not be legal, not while Morrison is alive, but it would be real in the ways that matter, and it would give you protection. Protection. Zachariah, a fake marriage would not protect me from anything. Not a fake marriage, a real one in every way that counts. Move in here permanently, take my name, live as my wife. If Morrison somehow tracks you here, he will find a married woman living with her husband, and that would make things complicated for him legally. He could not just drag you away. He would have to prove you are his Helena Morrison, and you could claim you have never heard of her, that you are Helena Mercer and have been for years. It would be your word against his, and out here, far from Missouri, with no witnesses who can prove otherwise, your word would carry weight. She shook her head, backing away from him. You are talking about building an entire life on a lie. I am talking about building a life, period. Maybe it starts with a lie, but it does not have to stay one. I told you last night that I do not have family, that I get lonely. I meant it. I have been alone for so long, Helena. And then I found you, and suddenly being alone feels like the worst kind of punishment. You do not love me. You do not even know me. I know enough. I know you are strong and brave and determined to survive. I know you have been through hell and came out the other side still fighting. I know that when I look at you, I see the possibility of a future that does not feel empty. He took a step toward her, then another, until they were inches apart. And maybe I do not know what love is supposed to feel like, but I know that the thought of you leaving tears at me. I know that I would fight any man who tried to hurt you. I know that I want to wake up and see your face every morning for the rest of my life. If that is not love, it is close enough for me. Zachariah. Her voice broke on his name. This is insane. Maybe, but is it any more insane than you running forever? Is it worse than spending the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, waiting for him to find you again? He took her hands in his, feeling them tremble. At least here you would have someone standing with you. At least here you would have a home. What if you change your mind? What if 6 months from now you wake up and realize you have tied yourself to a woman you do not want, cannot have legally, and cannot get rid of? Then I will live with my choice. But I will not change my mind, Helena. I am many things, but I am not fickle. She searched his face for a long moment, and he could see the war happening behind her eyes. Hope battling fear, the desperate desire to believe fighting against years of betrayal and pain. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "If we do this, if I agree to this, it has to be a real marriage. In every way. I will not live as your dependent or your ward or some woman you are keeping out of pity. If I am your wife, I am your wife. Equal partners in everything." Heat rushed through him at her words, at the implications behind them. "I would not want it any other way. And if Thomas finds us, we face him together. You do not get to sacrifice yourself to save me. We stand or fall together." "Together," he agreed. She took a shaky breath, then nodded once, decisive. All right. I must be as crazy as you are, but all right. Let us build a life on a lie and see if we can make it true." They stood there in the firelight, hands clasped, and Zachariah felt the weight of what they were undertaking settle over him like a mantle. This was no small thing they were doing. This was a leap into unknown territory, a gamble with both their futures. But looking at Helena, seeing the tentative hope dawning on her face, he could not bring himself to regret it. "So," he said, trying to lighten the moment, "should we say some words, make it official?" "I suppose we should." Helena squeezed his hands. "I do not remember the traditional vows." "Neither do I. Guess we will have to make up our own." They stood facing each other, and Zachariah spoke first, his voice rough with emotion. "I, Zachariah Mercer, take you, Helena Morrison, to be my wife. I promise to protect you, provide for you, and stand beside you for as long as I draw breath. I promise to honor your strength and respect your freedom. I promise that you will never have to be afraid in our home. This I swear on my life." Helena's eyes were bright with tears. "I, Helena Morrison, take you, Zachariah Mercer, to be my husband. I promise to be a true partner to you, to share in your burdens and your joys. I promise to bring to our life together all the strength and courage I have. I promise to trust you with the parts of myself I thought were broken beyond repair. This I swear on my life. Then, by the authority of two people who have the right to determine their own fates, I declare us married." Zachariah pulled her close, and she came willingly, wrapping her arms around him and burying her face in his chest. They stood like that for a long time, just holding each other, feeling the reality of what they had done settle into their bones. Finally, Helena pulled back enough to look up at him. "I should probably tell you that I have no idea how to be a good wife. Thomas always said I was a failure at it. Thomas was a fool who would not know a good woman if she hit him with a frying pan." Zachariah tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "You do not have to be anything other than yourself, Helena. That is all I want. What if myself is broken? Then we will figure out how to work around the broken parts, or maybe we will heal them. We have time." She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her whole face. "Time? When did I last have time?" They shared a simple dinner and talked late into the night, getting to know each other properly. Helena told him about her childhood, about her sisters and the father who taught her to read Latin, and the mother who could make a dress from nothing but scraps. She told him about the early days with Thomas before the mask came off, and about the moment she first knew she had made a terrible mistake. "It was 3 months after we married. He hit me because dinner was late, and then he cried and apologized and swore it would never happen again. But I knew. I knew it would happen again and again, and I was right. Zachariah told her about his own ghosts, about watching his father drink himself to death and his mother waste away from grief. I swore I would never be like him, never let anything control me the way alcohol controlled him. Maybe that is why I ended up living the way I do, answering to no one, staying free. And now you are taking on a wife. That is not exactly freedom. No, he agreed, but maybe it is something better. When exhaustion finally overtook them, Zachariah made up his bed by the stove as he had the previous night. Helena watched him from where she sat on the edge of the bed, then said quietly, "We are married now. You do not have to sleep on the floor." His hands stilled on the blanket he was arranging. "Helena, I do not expect anything from you. What we said today, the promises we made, those do not come with obligations. You have been through enough without me adding pressure. I know, and I appreciate that. But I meant what I said about this being a real marriage." She stood and crossed to him, taking his hands. "I am not doing this out of obligation. I am doing it because for the first time in years I want to, because when you touch me I do not feel afraid, I feel alive. Are you sure?" He searched her face. "If we do this, there is no taking it back. I have not been sure of anything in a very long time, but I am sure of this. I am sure of you." She led him to the bed and they lay down together, tentative at first and then with growing confidence. Zachariah held her as if she were something precious, and she clung to him as if he were her anchor in a storm. What passed between them that night was tender and careful, two wounded people finding healing in each other. Helena cried afterward, but they were good tears, the kind that washed away old pain. "I forgot," she whispered against his chest. "I forgot that it could be like this, that it should be like this." "It will always be like this with me," Zachariah promised. "Gentle, good. Never anything you do not want." "I want everything," she said fiercely. "I want a life, I want a future, I want to stop being afraid. Then that is what we will build, starting tomorrow." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and for the first time since Zachariah could remember, his dreams were full of light. The next months passed in a strange kind of peace. Winter deepened around the cabin, snow piling up until they were truly isolated from the world. Zachariah taught Helena how to shoot his rifle, how to read the signs of game animals, how to preserve meat and make soap, and all the 100 skills necessary for mountain living. She proved to be a quick study, approaching each new task with the same determination he had seen in her from the beginning. In turn, Helena brought life to the cabin in ways he had not anticipated. She organized the shelves, sewed curtains for the windows, created small touches of domesticity that made the space feel like a home instead of just a shelter. She read to him in the evenings from the books he had bought, her voice bringing stories to life. She began writing again, filling page after page with the novel she had always wanted to create, and sometimes she read passages aloud to him and asked his opinion. They learned each other slowly, carefully, the way you would study a map of unknown territory. Helena's nightmares woke her screaming sometimes, and Zachariah would hold her until she stopped shaking. He told her about the darkness that sometimes descended on him without warning, the days when everything felt hollow and gray, and she learned to recognize the signs and simply be present without trying to fix what could not be fixed. The fear of Thomas Morrison was always there, a shadow hanging over their happiness, but as the weeks passed it grew smaller. No one could reach the cabin in the deep winter snows. They were safe in their isolation, building something real from the lie they had started with. "You ever regret it?" Helena asked one night as they lay in bed, the wind howling outside. "Taking me in, marrying me, not once, not even for a second." I regret something, she said, and his heart lurched until she continued. I regret that I cannot give you a real marriage. Legal and proper and recognized by the world, you deserve better than a shadow wife. Zachariah rolled to face her, cupping her cheek in his palm. You are not a shadow. You are the most real thing in my life. I do not care about legal papers or recognition from a world that would not protect you when you needed it. This is real. We are real. That is enough. I love you, she said, and it was the first time either of them had spoken the words aloud. I did not think I could ever say that to someone and mean it, but I love you, Zachariah Mercer. I love you too, Helena Mercer. He smiled at the name. How does that sound? Like home, she said, and kissed him. Spring came slowly to the high country, the snow melting in grudging increments. As the trails became passable again, Zachariah knew he would have to make trips down to Holbrook for supplies. The thought filled him with dread. What if Morrison was still there, still searching? What if someone had pieced things together, but they could not hide in the cabin forever? They needed flour and sugar and coffee, things they could not produce themselves. So one morning in late April, Zachariah saddled his mare and prepared to make the journey. I will be careful, he promised Helena, who stood in the doorway looking worried. In and out, no talking to anyone more than necessary. 3 days at most. Come back to me, she said simply. That is all I ask. The ride down was uneventful, the mountains beautiful in their spring green. Holbrook had grown in the month since his last visit, new buildings going up along the main street. Zachariah kept his hat pulled low and moved quickly through his purchasing, hitting different stores as before. Everywhere he went, he listened for news, for any mention of Thomas Morrison or a missing woman, but he heard nothing. It seemed Morrison had finally given up and moved on. He was loading his last purchases when a woman's voice called out, "Excuse me, sir. Could you help me?" Zachariah turned to find a well-dressed lady struggling with a trunk that had fallen from her wagon. He helped her lift it back into place, and she smiled gratefully. "Thank you so much. My husband is usually here to handle such things, but he is away on business." "No trouble, madam." He tipped his hat and started to walk away. "I have not seen you around town before. Are you new to the area?" Something in her tone made him wary, too friendly and too curious. "Just passing through." "Ah. Well, if you happen to see a young woman traveling alone, dark hair, green eyes, there is a substantial reward for information. My husband has been searching for his poor, confused sister for months. The family is quite worried." Zachariah's blood ran cold. This was Morrison's wife, had to be, helping in the search. Or maybe there was no other wife and Morrison had found some woman willing to help him for a cut of the reward. Either way, he kept his face carefully blank. "I will keep an eye out. Excuse me, madam." He forced himself to walk calmly to his horse, to ride out of town at a normal pace. Only when he was well clear did he urge the mare to speed. They were not giving up. Morrison and whoever was helping him were still searching. The cabin was not safe anymore. Nothing was safe. He rode hard, pushing the horse to the edge of its endurance, and reached the cabin in less than a day and a half. Helena met him at the door, taking one look at his face and going pale. "What happened?" He told her everything while he unloaded supplies. Her hands clenched into fists as she listened. "We have to leave." "Where would we go? He seems to have resources everywhere, people helping him, people looking, and the law is on his side. You are his legal wife until one of you dies." Helena paced the cabin floor, agitated. "Then maybe that is the answer. Maybe I need to die." "What? Not really die. But Helena Morrison needs to disappear completely. If I could get a death certificate, or if Thomas thought I was dead, he would stop looking. The search would end." Zachariah stared at her, the audacity of the idea taking his breath away. How would we even accomplish that? I do not know. But there has to be a way. People die in the territories all the time. Accidents, animals, exposure. Bodies are not always recovered. Her eyes grew distant, calculating. What if Helena Morrison did die out here last winter? What if some trapper or hunter found remains in the spring and reported them? It would not be that unusual. You are talking about faking your death. That is a serious crime. And Thomas beating me half to death was not. Thomas hunting me across 3 territories like an animal was not. Her voice rose, sharp with frustration. I am tired of running, Zachariah. I am tired of looking over my shoulder. I want this to end, and if the law will not help me, then I will have to help myself. He understood her desperation, felt it echoing in his own chest. Even if we could pull it off, even if we convinced Morrison you were dead, you could never be Helena Morrison again. You would have to be Helena Mercer forever, and if anyone ever discovered the truth, we would both hang. I am already Helena Mercer. I have been for months. Helena Morrison did die last winter in a very real way. She died when she collapsed in that snow and you found her. Everything after that has been a new life. Let us just make it official. They spent days planning, turning the idea over from every angle, looking for flaws. Finally, they settled on a story. A woman's body, badly decomposed and mauled by animals, found in the mountains by a trapper. Enough physical details to be convincing, but nothing that could be definitively proven or disproven. Zachariah would be the one to report it, playing the role of the unfortunate discoverer. He would describe the body as wearing the same dress Helena had been wearing when he found her, would mention the scar on her forehead. Enough detail to be convincing without being able to produce actual remains. It was risky. It was possibly insane. But it was also their best chance at a real future. Zachariah rode to Holbrook in mid-May and went straight to the sheriff's office. He told his story haltingly, playing the part of a reluctant bearer of bad news. Yes, he had found a woman's body in the high country, badly decomposed. No, he had not moved it, but he had noted its location. Dark hair, simple dress, a distinctive scar. The sheriff listened, took notes, and then showed him the poster that was still hanging in the window. Could be her, Zachariah said carefully. Hard to say with the state the body was in. But the scar matches. The sheriff sent 2 deputies out with Zachariah to investigate. He led them on a wild chase through the mountains, far from his cabin, to a remote area where he claimed to have made the discovery. Of course, there was no body. Just signs that something had died there. Bones he had scattered from an elk carcass. Scraps of fabric he had strategically placed. The deputies poked around for an hour, declared it was impossible to tell anything conclusive, and decided the animals must have scattered the remains further. We will have to inform the husband, the sheriff said when they returned to town. He has been searching a long time. He deserves to know. Thomas Morrison's reaction to the news was everything Zachariah hoped for and feared. The man listened to the story, demanded to see the location himself, and spent 3 days scouring the mountains with hired men. But there was nothing to find except the carefully staged scene. Finally, defeated, Morrison returned to town and made arrangements to leave. Zachariah watched from across the street as Morrison boarded the stage heading east, and only then did he allow himself to believe it might have worked. Helena Morrison was officially dead. The search was over. He rode back to the cabin with his heart pounding, and Helena met him in the yard. Well, he is gone. He left on the eastbound stage this morning. As far as the world knows, Helena Morrison died in the Arizona mountains in the winter of 1882. She collapsed against him, shaking with relief and tears. It is over. It is really over. It is over, he confirmed, holding her tight. You are free. They celebrated that night, breaking out the bottle of whiskey Zachariah had been saving for a special occasion. They drank and laughed and made love with a freedom neither had felt before. The shadow of Thomas Morrison finally lifted from their lives. Helena was giddy with relief, spinning around the cabin and declaring she wanted to do everything she had been too afraid to do before. She wanted to go to town. She wanted to meet people. She wanted to live loudly and openly as Helena Mercer. Soon, Zachariah promised. Let us give it a few more months, make sure Morrison is really gone and not just waiting to see if you surface. Come winter we will start making trips to Holbrook together. You can buy fabric at the general store, have coffee at the hotel, be seen and recognized as my wife. We will build you a whole history as Helena Mercer, and no one will ever question it. She agreed, though the waiting chafed at her newfound freedom. They spent the summer and fall working on the cabin, expanding it with a second room and a real porch. Zachariah taught Helena to fish and hunt, and she became proficient enough that she could provide for herself if she ever needed to. She finished her novel and started another one. She sewed new clothes for both of them. She planted a garden in a sunny spot near the cabin and tended it with fierce devotion. They were happy. Genuinely, deeply happy in a way Zachariah had never imagined possible. Every day with Helena felt like a gift, every morning waking up beside her a small miracle. She laughed more as the months passed, the shadows gradually leaving her eyes. She still had nightmares sometimes, still flinched at sudden movements, but the healing was happening. Time and safety and love were working their magic. In December, a year after he had found her in the snow, they rode into Holbrook together. Helena wore a new blue dress she had made herself, and a wedding ring Zachariah had purchased on his last solo trip. They walked down the main street arm in arm, and she marveled at everything. The hustle of the town after so long in the mountains, the variety in the stores, the sound of so many voices. At the general store, the proprietor's wife, Mrs. Jenkins, struck up a conversation. I have not seen you before. Are you new to the area? My husband has been here for years, Helena said with confidence. But I was back east taking care of my mother. She passed in the spring, and now I am finally able to join him in our home. Oh, you poor dear. And where is your home? Up in the mountains. My husband built us a beautiful cabin. It is isolated, but I prefer the peace and quiet. Mrs. Jenkins nodded sympathetically, and just like that, Helena Mercer's history began to solidify. They repeated similar conversations at the hotel restaurant, at the livery stable, at the saloon where Zachariah went for a drink while Helena browsed the dry goods store. By the end of the day, half the town had met the sweet Mrs. Mercer, who had finally come west to join her husband after her mother's death. No one questioned the story. No one looked at her and saw Helena Morrison. She was simply one more wife making a new life in the Arizona territory. It worked, Helena said on the ride home, her voice full of wonder. It actually worked. I am real now. You were always real, Zachariah corrected, but now the world agrees. That winter was the best of Zachariah's life. They were snowed in for weeks at a time, but it did not matter because they had each other. Helena read her finished novel to him by firelight, and he was amazed by the quality of her writing, the way she crafted characters and built tension. You should try to get this published, he said. Maybe I will. Helena Mercer can do things Helena Morrison never could. They made plans for the future, talking late into the night about what they wanted their life to look like. Helena wanted to keep writing, maybe build a reputation as an author. Zachariah was thinking about starting a guide service, using his knowledge of the mountains to help hunters and surveyors. They talked about children, whether they wanted them, and decided they did eventually when they were more settled. Spring came again, and with it a surprise. Helena had been feeling ill in the mornings, tired in a way that sleep did not fix. When she missed her monthly courses for the second time, they looked at each other with dawning realization. "I am pregnant," she said, wonder and fear warring in her voice. "We are going to have a baby." Zachariah felt like the earth had shifted under his feet. A baby. Their baby. Proof of everything they had built together. "How do you feel about that?" "Terrified," she admitted, "and happy, and terrified again. I have no idea how to be a mother. What if I am terrible at it? You will be wonderful at it." He pulled her close. "We will figure it out together, the same way we have figured out everything else." The pregnancy progressed through the summer, Helena growing round with their child. She stayed healthy despite occasional sickness, and her spirits remained high. They made one trip to Holbrook to see a doctor, who pronounced both mother and baby in good health. In town, they let slip the news to Mrs. Jenkins, knowing it would spread. The Mercers were expecting their first child. How wonderful for them! In October, as the aspens turned gold on the mountainsides, Helena went into labor. Zachariah had read everything he could find about childbirth and prepared as best he could, but the reality was still terrifying. Helena labored for hours, gripping his hand so hard he thought she might break bones, and he felt helpless in the face of her pain. But finally, as the sun was setting, their son was born, entering the world with a lusty cry that made them both laugh with relief. "A boy," Zachariah said, holding the tiny, wrinkled creature with shaking hands. "We have a son." "What should we name him?" Helena asked, exhausted but glowing. They had discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at his son's face, Zachariah thought about his own father, about the man he had been before alcohol destroyed him. James Mercer, after my father. He was a good man before the darkness took him. Maybe our James will have a better life." "James Mercer," Helena repeated, testing it. "I like it. Hello, James. Welcome to the world." They adjusted to parenthood with varying degrees of success and exhaustion. James was a demanding baby, colicky and poor at sleeping, but they loved him fiercely. Helena proved to be a natural mother, despite her fears, patient and nurturing. Zachariah discovered reserves of gentleness he had not known he possessed, rocking his son through endless nights and feeling his heart expand with a love that bordered on painful. The cabin felt smaller with 3 of them, so the next spring they started building an addition, a proper nursery, and eventually a second bedroom. Other homesteaders in the area began to notice them, and they formed loose friendships with a few families. No one questioned their history. To everyone who met them, they were simply the Mercers, a young couple making a life in the mountains with their son. James grew from a colicky baby into a curious toddler, then an energetic child who loved exploring the forest around their home. When he was 3, Helena discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1886 they welcomed a daughter they named Caroline after Helena's mother. Life settled into a rhythm. Zachariah's guide service grew successful enough that they had more money than they strictly needed. Helena published her novel under the name H.L. Mercer, and to everyone's surprise, it sold well enough that publishers were asking for more. They built a larger cabin, almost a proper house now, with multiple rooms and glass windows and a wood floor. They acquired chickens and a milk cow. They became pillars of the small mountain community that was forming in the area. Sometimes, lying in bed at night with Helena asleep beside him and his children safe in the next room, Zachariah would think about that morning when he found her in the snow and marvel at how his life had changed. A single choice to stop and help had led to everything he now held dear. One evening when James was 7 and Caroline was 4, James asked a question over dinner that made both parents freeze. "Papa, Mama, how did you meet?" Helena and Zachariah exchanged glances. They had known this moment would come eventually, but had never quite figured out how to handle it. Finally, Helena spoke, choosing her words carefully. "Your father found me when I was lost in the mountains during a terrible storm. I was in trouble, very scared and very cold, and he saved my life. He took me to his cabin and made sure I was safe, and as we got to know each other, we fell in love." It was the truth, or as much of the truth as their children needed. James nodded, satisfied, and Caroline demanded to hear more about the storm and how deep the snow was. The moment passed, and Zachariah felt Helena's hand find his under the table, squeezing gently. Years continued to roll by, marked by the usual milestones of family life. James learned to hunt and track like his father. Caroline showed her mother's gift for words and spent hours writing stories of her own. The cabin became a house, became a true homestead. Zachariah and Helena grew older together, silver threading through their hair, but the love between them never faded. If anything, it deepened, tempered by shared experience and mutual respect. On their 15th anniversary, calculated from that day in the hunting shelter when they had spoken their private vows, Zachariah surprised Helena with a ring he had spent months crafting from silver and turquoise. "I know we cannot ever make it legal," he said as he slipped it on her finger. "But I wanted you to have something beautiful, something that says what you mean to me." Helena cried and kissed him and told him he was ridiculous and wonderful. That night, after the children were asleep, they sat on their porch and watched the stars wheel overhead, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "You ever regret it?" she asked, an echo of a question from years before. "Giving up the life you had for this?" "Not for 1 second," he answered, and it was still true. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Helena Mercer. You and our children and this life we built. I would not trade it for anything." "I love you," she said. "I will love you until the day I die and probably beyond." "That is good," Zachariah said with a smile, "because you are stuck with me forever." They grew old together in their mountain home. James married a girl from Holbrook and gave them 3 grandchildren. Caroline became a teacher in town and then a published author like her mother. Helena wrote 6 more novels and became modestly famous under her pen name, though she never attended the literary events in her honor, preferring her privacy. Zachariah's hair went from gray to white, and his steps grew slower, but he still walked the mountain trails he loved with Helena beside him. On a summer evening in 1903, when they were both in their 60s, they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and red. Helena's head was on Zachariah's shoulder, his arm around her waist, exactly as they had sat so many times before. But this time, she spoke with a seriousness that made him turn to look at her. "I want you to know something," she said. "In case I do not get a chance to say it later, you saved my life that morning in the snow, but you did more than that. You gave me back myself. You taught me that love does not have to hurt, that it can be gentle and good and true. You gave me a family and a home and a future I never thought I could have. You are the best man I have ever known, Zachariah Mercer, and I thank God every day that you found me." "I was just doing what anyone should have done," he protested, but she put a finger to his lips. "No. You did what few men would have. You saw someone in trouble and you helped without asking for anything in return. And then you loved me without reservation, without conditions, without ever making me feel like I owed you for my own rescue. That is rare, Zachariah. That is precious. And I need you to know that I see it and I am grateful. Helena." His voice was rough with emotion. You are the love of my life. Finding you was not just helping someone. It was finding the other half of my soul. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. They kissed as the sun sank below the mountains, two old people still deeply in love after more than 20 years together. And if their marriage had begun with a lie, if Helena Mercer had risen from the death of Helena Morrison, well, that no longer mattered. What mattered was the life they had built, the love they had shared, the family they had created. Thomas Morrison was long dead, having passed from a heart ailment some years previous according to a newspaper clipping James had found and shown his mother. Helena had looked at the notice for a long time, feeling nothing but a distant sense of closure. That man had no power over her anymore. He had not had power over her for decades. She was Helena Mercer, wife and mother and writer, and she was free. When Zachariah finally passed away in his sleep at the age of 72, Helena mourned him deeply but without regret. They had been given more than 25 years together, years full of love and laughter and purpose. She had his children and grandchildren to carry on his legacy. And she had the memories of a man who had seen her at her most desperate and chosen to help, who had offered her his name and his protection, and his heart without asking for anything in return. Helena lived another 10 years, surrounded by her family in the house Zachariah had built. She finished her final novel, dedicated to the memory of the cowboy who had found her in the snow and changed her life forever. When she passed away peacefully at the age of 81, she was buried beside him in the small cemetery on the mountain, and their children made sure their headstones matched, husband and wife together for eternity. The story of how they met became family legend, passed down through generations. The woman who collapsed in the snow and the cowboy who saved her, who built a life together in the Arizona mountains and loved each other until death parted them. It was a story of courage and compassion, of second chances and hard-won happiness. And it was, in all the ways that mattered most, true.